Welcome to today's episode of Awaken the Feminine Within. Today, I have with me an amazing guest, Katie Skinner, and we are getting all in to the topic of what it's like to be a mom and how to be and lean more into feminine energy without doing more and without feeling guilt, because it's a big issue. And I think it's a big question for a lot of moms who are listening to my podcast so far, who have been like, okay, well, doing less is clearly so essential to feminine energy. But how does one do that when you have kids and a full-time job and schedules and a partner and all these things? So Katie is amazing. We connected a while ago, a couple years ago, through Catherine Zankita's Manifestation Babe Academy, which was amazing. And I just love that we kind of connected this way because it's, I guess, yeah. I mean, we weren't even in the same like accountability group together, but Katie is incredible because she helps women and just people in general help them love themselves and develop a sense of self-intimacy through movement and hypnotism. And so it's a really awesome, unique combo because literally, like, and I've talked about this so much, like somatic therapy and like movement and just like learning to move trauma throughout your body is so essential. So Katie has all of that like up in her wheelhouse and I love it. So Katie, tell us about you a little bit more, all the good things.
Wow, what an introduction. Yeah, you said it. I feel like my whole life, I was very, very book smart growing up, or I tried very hard to be. And I think I was spending most of my life in my conscious mind. And it wasn't until I started taking dance classes to be like my older sister, because she took dance classes, so I wanted to be like her, that I finally started to find a different form of intelligence, which is physical intelligence and coordination, working with your brain and like balancing your brain and your body. That just fascinated me as a kid. My sister stopped doing dance and I still need to do so. It just opened up and unraveled this huge journey for me of learning my body's intelligence, because whenever I wasn't dancing as a kid, I felt like the stupidest child. Like I felt so detached from this superpower that I had. But, you know, all the lifelong reasons, like I don't have time for this. I can't, you know, my parents can't afford dance classes, or that's not what I want to study in college. I don't want to study dance, or et cetera, et cetera. And then add in a slew of body image issues, eating disorders, all these things that just like have consistently cut me off from my body. And it wasn't until I was working as a barista after college, really confused about what I was going to do with my life. I felt like I was just completely burned out, didn't have any energy, didn't know where I was going with my life, because I felt like I completely frazzled my conscious mind. I have a degree in psychology, right? Like our frontal lobe, our higher thinking. When I say higher thinking, I mean like our ability, like what separates us from animals, like our ability to like perform math and like do puzzles, like that level of thinking that you're in right now by listening to this podcast or by me having a conversation. Like I felt like that part of my body was just completely tapped out, frazzled. I couldn't think. One huge symptom that I was dealing with was I would come home and just be like couch potato mode. Like nobody talked to me, nobody touched me, don't move. And that's a space where a lot of codependency on food, drugs, television, just things that get us back into our body can fester. And I was definitely in that space for a really, really, really long time. And it wasn't until I started to get creative with my movement. I was going to the gym at the time because I felt like I quote unquote had to. I wanted to quote unquote lose weight. I wanted to tone up. I wanted to just feel something different and maybe start to like build a better life for myself. And I just kind of like felt like there was this inner child version of me at the time that gave up on my dreams of like ever becoming a dancer. Like I wanted to be a ballerina. I wanted to be a belly dancer, all these things, but I felt like that's gone. Like I have a college degree. I need to be taken as like a serious woman. So I'm never going to like play in my body ever again, because that's for people who have dedicated themselves to dance and what have you. And it wasn't until I started learning and teaching this movement modality called Booty Yoga that incorporates elements of power yoga, as well as somatic therapy. There's a lot of shaking and movement and drumming and all that kind of stuff that has just opened me up to this whole new world. And I have just ever followed that thread. And here we are. Not happily ever after, but like, of course, a lot of million micro decisions led me to where I am now. But it felt like this battle between my brain and body that got me to where I am right now.
I love that so much. And I mean, it's so interesting because yesterday I was telling a photography client of mine, because I was explaining how, you know, processing trauma through your body is like, in my opinion, arguably more important than the like seeing a therapy type of therapy. Because I'm just like, I mean, the body is literally where it all gets stored. I mean, the mind is also an essential part, But it's like, if you can process it through your body, I feel like you can process it way faster through your brain. And so I love that you found something that finally gave you that freedom, because I think, and then this podcast, we've talked a lot about like the importance of feeling and just like the importance of being able to connect with your body, because for a woman, we all live in our head and we don't even process anything physically anymore. And then women wonder why they don't want anybody to touch them, including their own children, right? And how they get so cuddled out so quickly. So talk to us though about what it's like for you as a mom right now, because it's pertinent to the conversation that we're about to get into.
Yeah, I have recently just discovered this massive breakthrough. Like you always have them, they never end. That setting boundaries and being selfish opens up. It sounds like such a closing thing. Like I don't even like to use the phrase setting boundaries or being selfish, but that is what it is at the end of the day. It feels like you're closing this door, like you're saying no, and that's final, and you no longer get to have this thing. When in reality, it's the way that I see it now is that you're opening up a door to this like whole castle. Like if you feel like you're living in a 1-bedroom apartment and everything is so tight and like bumping into somebody is just going to cause you to go into a blind rage, imagine that you can just like open up this door and you have a whole other castle inside of that door. And that to me is what setting a boundary, an aligned boundary, and being selfish with your time in an aligned way feels like. Like you just go through this door and there is so much here now. We have so much space because it takes some no's and some yeses and some rethinking to get to that castle. And once you're there, you can create. Like, I think that's what leads a lot of, for me personally, I felt a lot of fear around opening up that door, so to speak, setting that boundary, because on the other side, you have to be really creative. You can't just say no at the end. You have to intentionally align yourself with like, what decisions will you make now with this new free time? Who will you be with this free time? I think the concept of free time is very scary, because what is more terrifying than a blank canvas? Like, it's just so, it's like a big mirror. Like, who are you with this new free time? And that there's a lot of shadow work there. There's a lot of questions to be asked. There's a lot of discovery that gets to happen. It's like you open this door and there's a giant castle, right? And imagine it's like a house of mirrors is the analogy I'm thinking in my head right now. You open this door, and I'm a hypnotist, right? I love to work with visuals. You open this door and there's halls and halls of, it's blank. There's no furniture. It's just mirrors, and you're seeing yourself. And does that ignite you? Does that excite you? Does that make you feel like, ooh, let's dress this up. Let's add some flowers. Let's add a bar cart. Let's add a couch. What color do I want this room to be? That is hard. That is scary. That is a big ask of yourself. And I think just having the bravery to open that door and look in the mirror and fill the space with creativity is enough to make someone want to shut down and not even try. And inside of our bodies, I so believe this, are all these stories and all these desires and all these wishes co-mingling in with the trauma. Like, you're not just, whenever I tell people that they're like, trauma lives in the body, a response I've heard so many times is like, ew, like, keep it in. I don't want it to come out. Like, keep that in. And people say it in jest, or I also see fear when I say like, release the trauma. Like, I would rather keep that down. Mm-hmm. Would you rather live in a 1-bedroom apartment with your kids, like, and your husband and, what have you? Or would you rather clean some things out and let the other parts of you breathe, the desires, the ideas? Like, if you want to make your life this beautiful castle, there are plenty of stories inside your body that are filled with ideas of what to bring, is the visual that I have.
Well, and I think it's, it's really terrifying, hearing you explain that like that with those visuals. It's like, of course, I think what scares women most, especially in the stage of motherhood, in the context specifically to motherhood, is the idea that if they have more free time or if they have boundaries, that they will no longer be as good of a mom, which is so ironic, because I'm like, what a load of shit. Like, yeah, you having time or creativity or passions or hobbies outside of your children, and I'll argue this till the day I die, makes you a better mom, and it makes you more present in your marriage, in your relationship, in your family, for your kids, like so many things, because you're not burning the candle at both ends. But I want to get back to what stage of motherhood that you're in right now, because I feel like the stage that you're in is arguably like in my personal opinion, having 3 kids, like the hardest stage, because it's not like your kids in school where you have like, 9 to 5 to at least have a little bit of brain space, or you know what I mean? Or even like after school care where you can be like, great, I have like 30 minutes in the car to drive to, and I have a little bit of time, or like, say they come home and they start gaming, like, okay, well, you still have time. You know what I mean? Or like, say you drop them off at sports. Okay, well, now you still have a little bit of time. But like where you're at right now, you don't have any of that. Like you're literally practically like waiting hand on foot on your child. Basically, like you don't have any, unless you hire it out. But let's talk about what that's like dealing with and how you transition into creating boundaries when you're like, shoot, my kid needs me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So where I'm at right now, my son, August, is 15, almost 16 months old. My husband currently right now he's a high school teacher. So he is off for summer break right now. And he is also in a stage of his life where he wants to be selfish and do his own projects as well, because throughout the year, he is giving and giving and giving to these teenagers. And now he says, I have these 2.5 months off, almost 3. We are constantly communicating. He wants to do a lot of projects. He wants to see certain friends at certain times. He gets to have that. And I have to work against the specific programming that my mother gave me to my subconscious, my old behaviors wants to shut down and say, okay, there's no time for me. If you want to go, he likes to do house projects. So if you want to work in the basement for several hours and then you want to go play disc golf with your friend, I don't get to have what I want. That is a programming that has been passed down to me. If you want to spend, our limited fun time budget on what you want to do, that is that many dollars that I don't get to have. And I've had to catch myself thinking that a lot of times and ask myself, is that really true? And maybe it is true. Maybe there really only is X amount of dollars in our fund budget, but how can I be more creative? Like it's like this crucial issue of creativity, because I thought that being like a selfish mother, quote unquote, like being setting boundaries and being a great mother means that you need to have a lot of money. And that's something that and like a lot of time and a lot of help, which is true in a way, because I see a lot of TikTok comments, for example. A lot of people say to me on Instagram and what have you, like, must be nice if you could afford a nanny. And it just requires this constant creativity, this constant conversation. And that is the expensive part, in my opinion, is the time-consuming conversations and the not getting triggered, not shutting down, not getting angry at your partner, but rather insisting that both of you get to have your time doing things separately, doing things together. I'm laughing at myself because I thought that it was like, oh my gosh, being a mother means I'm going to have to shell out so much money for a nanny, when in reality, I'm going to have to shell out so much emotional attention to my husband in these conversations, in these being creative and asking somebody else to watch him for an hour and truly maximizing that time, because our village, as they say, they're not experts in childcare. So I can't just give him to my mom, my husband's mom. That's not something that's not a luxury I have. She can't just take him for 8 hours while I have the day off. I have to really maximize that time and say, can you take him for these 2 hours after he's napped and just play with him for 2 hours? And I maximize those 2 hours, and not in this overly hustly way, okay, now I got to work. But really ask myself, is it in my highest good to take those 2 hours and scroll TikTok uninterrupted? Is it in my highest good to take those 2 hours to build my business? Is it in my highest good to take those 2 hours and take a yoga class? Constant conversations that I'm having in my head. That is, again, the expensive part, is the thinking and the trying and the failing and the not always getting it right, and forgiving yourself if there's a day that you just did not get it right, is, in my mind, where I'm at right now with our toddler, who is definitely in his separation anxiety phase. He's definitely in his mommy, please don't wean me phase. I'm still breastfeeding him, and he's in that stage where he that is just his comfort, but when he's with other people, he doesn't need it. So it's just such a fascinating seeing him be completely independent with someone else, but when he comes to me, all he wants is closeness and comfort, and we're navigating that. And it's a puzzle piece. It's a beautiful work of art in a puzzle piece to constantly have these conversations and work through this.
So how do you do you find that you experienced any guilt in your desire to create or to have time at all in this transition period of like, you know, I'm assuming, you know, probably from like when he was like 3 months old? I feel like that's kind of like the typical age where you're like, okay, I need to get back into my whatever normal routine looks like now that you're a mom, you know? But how do you deal with that identity aspect of like, I'm a mom, I'm supposed to give myself entirely to my kid, but also at the same time, I need to rediscover what it's like for me to have me time, or say for women who are listening to this podcast that are like, you know, my kids might be 10, 15, 25, 30, and they're still trying to figure out what it's like to have an identity outside of just solely motherhood.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that have helped me with this. Number one, first and foremost, is hypnosis, hypnotherapy. To bring it back to that visual of like saying yes to opening that door instead of I'm drawing a boundary, I now have less, like I now have this guilt on top of me. But I think that I have done hypnotherapy where I've thought of the guilt as like running a marathon with a backpack on, and everyone around you is running along with you, but you're the only one with this backpack on. And you're like, wow, I've carried this backpack for many, many, many miles. What if I took it off? And then there's going to be like an awkward phase where you're going to feel like a weird breeze on your back and you'll notice that you're sweaty. Like there's just going to be this like awkward adjustment, but ultimately you will find that you start running faster. That visual implanted in your subconscious mind will really, really help. And also saying yes, taking out that backpack, opening up the door, and you're in this, let's say, castle of mirrors with lots of empty space waiting for you to create, thinking that that guilt is inhibiting your vision of that castle. I think a lot about how holding on to guilt is making me less good at my purpose, which is it is giving back to my family. That is something that I affirm to myself constantly. And if it doesn't feel true, like I feel like I'm not actually doing anything useful with my time, how can we make that true? How can we work with your concept of belief, your self-image? I think I'm curious if how many people are listening to this would hear like, you know, you deserve this whole castle. You deserve this more free space. You deserve this because what you're going to do with it is great and amazing and abundant and going to give back. And so it makes you a better mom. I'm curious how many people don't believe that. And I would be more curious to kind of go into their subconscious beliefs about what they have to offer this world other than just being a living person. Yeah. Like you gave birth to a baby and that is your only contribution. And one thing that I worked with that is noticing how triggered I feel when people treat me that way, because people do it. If you feel that way, you're not crazy. Like people do, like when I'm in a social situation and I'm holding my baby and people completely ignore me and just go up to my baby and start talking to him, that is a massive trigger for me. And I fight against it almost every time. When I have the energy, because I don't always, I have requested to family members like, hey, when I come into the room with my son, can you say hello to me too? Arguably first. Or when people have made the joke of like, oh, your son is so cute, we'd love to have him over, you're cool too, I guess. Like people have made that joke. Every time I've corrected them. And it makes me feel weird, but it's a boundary. It's a door that I'm opening. It's a backpack I'm taking off. Like every time, it's like those little awkward things every time. The second big thing that
you're fighting for yourself in that context. You're fighting for you to see you.
And I have to, again, consistently believe, even though it's hard, that I am worth so much too. Like, of course, it's easy to look at this adorable baby and this adorable child, this adorable person that you knew, even if they're an adult. Like, I knew you as a baby, and to me, you're worth everything. I see what you can do, and not look at yourself that same way. And there are days where I don't feel that way about myself, but it's just like this constant. It's like sometimes when you think about the concept of an affirmation and you write it down on a piece of paper, I am worthy. I have good things coming to me. Like me taking care of myself means I have more to give to everyone else. I visualize that being written down on a piece of paper and being tacked on my wall, and I can never take it off. Meaning, if you ever want to come up with an argument to that, like, yeah, but nope, sorry, it's on the wall. Like the wall says you irrefutably cannot argue with this. And that's the way that I see hypnosis, is like putting that into your subconscious mind. And your conscious mind will try to kind of like come up with this monkey chatter, like, yeah, but blah, 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 blah. Nope, sorry, read the wall. It's there. We cannot take this off. And that's kind of what I've done for myself. The other thing that really, really helps with this is being raised by somebody who did not live this way. and who definitely believed that the subconscious belief. I have a very good relationship with my mother. It took a lot of hard work. But a program that ran my mother's life was she is a vessel for her children, and that's it. And opportunities would come up for her, and I would see her actively sabotage them and say, no, I can't. I need to be with my children. When I visited her a few years ago, I asked her, she was talking about her kitchen or how she wanted to remodel her kitchen, but she couldn't. And I asked her why not. And she said, well, what if I have toddlers running around? It's just not safe. I can't remember the exact context, but she said something about like, I'm going to have toddlers around and it's not safe. And I said, Mom, what toddlers? Your youngest child is 22. What toddlers? And I saw that it kind of caught her, and she was still in this like, I am for my children. I must keep my toddlers safe, which is a powerful program. Being in that now, I can definitely see how that could implant deep traumatic roots and tell you the story over again. I can't have what I want. My toddler wants what he wants. And having a very strong-willed toddler myself now who wants what he wants, I hear him say or scream like, this is what I want. This is what I'm getting. And I say, yes. That does not negate what I want and what I'm getting, if that makes sense. Like, it's such an interesting balance. I'm not saying like, sorry, August, too bad. Mommy wants to scroll TikTok. We're not going to play. It's just this constant navigation. As long as you believe running in the background that you are worthy of more and what you want, the little day conversations become so much easier, if that makes sense.
So there's a lot of things that I'm downloading as you're talking. It sounds like ultimately what happens is the guilt associated with wanting more free time and wanting a sense of, even if they're pursuing the feminine energy and they're like, oh, I want to, earn more or have more opportunity and do less and actually experience a sense of peace and contentment, comes from the ability to recognize that it's perfectly safe and okay for them to have a sense of self. But if they don't believe that, then that's where the guilt comes in. And it's like, nope, you're always going to experience this guilt because you actually don't believe your sense of identity comes from your children and not yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's so powerful because you say your kids are like 25, 30, 40 years old and you're like, and you're still, no matter what they're doing in life, and you're like, whether they've done a good job with their lives or not, you're over here like, well, how I'm just feeling the pain of like, oh, well, my identity is through my children. There's always going to be this link. And I feel like that can affect the children as well, because then they're always going to be like, oh, well, I have to do good because my mom's identity is based on me and not on her. And so then you have this like really awkward, energetic link that should not exist for both mom and child, parent and child, that is making them both so freaking exhausted and both so like, because they're living in these little boxes of like expectations of like, oh, well, I constantly need to be there for them. I constantly need to like not go on vacation because what if, right? And then the kid's like, dude, can you like actually please go away?
Yeah.
Like, please give me like some space, because it's like, and I honestly think, and maybe this is just me speculating, that some children do go down paths that their parents specifically don't want them to do because they literally don't want to have anything to do with their parents, because the moms are like, their identities are literally so infused in their children that they are terrified of having their own. Because what would that mean? Exactly like you were saying about, choosing to have boundaries and opening up that castle door is like, oh, well, that would mean you would get to have more of what you want. And if you lived seeing your mom kill herself for you, then now you're ingrained with this, oh, I got to kill myself for my children too.
Yeah.
But everyone's kids have different personalities, and it just might so happen that your kids are just not going to do as well. And I also think, talking about breaking generational curses, like it's so important for women now in today's society, no matter what their age is, that they are, I feel like at any point in time, if you're going to choose you, it's never a bad thing. And I'm not saying to go say like, oh, fuck you guys, and like never, like root for country and like not existent. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But like, I think that's what women think, is that like, if they choose themselves, they're not choosing their children, but there is such a thing as balance. And like, you're a perfect example of that, because it's like, okay, yeah, just like you said, like, you're just because you need to have some personal time doesn't mean that you're not going to play with your son. It doesn't mean that you're not going to prioritize, your playtime as a family, your time with your partner, your, you get to have it all. And that's what you're actively choosing. So like, how would, when you navigate, and I mean, like, I feel like this is great because you were very already like in the personal development world and like, when you got pregnant. And so you kind of had a leg up. But say women are, in the day-to-day hustle and bustle of killing themselves. I'm going to use that word, even though it might trigger some women, because I feel like if you literally have no time for yourself and you feel guilty AF, if you literally take an hour for like, anything for yourself and you're like, oh, but my kids, and you whatever, and you feel triggered by that, that's a good thing. But if you say a woman is in that lifestyle and she's like absolutely terrified of developing a sense of self and terrified of having the belief and taking on the belief that she can have it all, that she can appease her children, give herself to her children, and also have a sense of self and have time and room to play, whatever it is. She doesn't even need to create something, but just to have a sense of self. What would you tell her? Like, how do you tell a woman who is so structured and caged by their body and societal beliefs and generational whatever they grew up with their mom seeing? How do you help them? Or what would you even tell them to help be like, okay, you can do this. You can believe this. Because it's such a vulnerable thing. It literally is like jumping off a cliff. I mean, how do you tell someone like you're going to it's actually going to be better if you do jump off the cliff. But they're just like, no, you're insane.
Easy for you to say. Yeah, like
exactly.
I would say the first thing I would say is like, if you're feeling scared, that's good, because it means there's medicine here. It means you care. I remember feeling like my brain when I was starting to become more selfish before even having children. So I can acknowledge just like how hard that is. I remember my brain would go to these absolute extremes of taking time to do this thing for myself would lead me to end up homeless. Like it's just that huge mind jump. And the first thing I would say is like, the fears are coming up, they're bubbling up. That is so good. You can look at them all in the face and start to neutralize that somatically. Like you can start to, the first thing I would do, if someone were right in front of me saying, I'm incredibly terrified, like if they're in their story and they're just letting this all bubble up, I would tell them to put their hand on their heart and lean back and say, I believe you. There's something so powerful about that. It's like telling yourself, I believe you. I believe you when you're telling me these stories. I believe you that these are scary. I don't think you're exaggerating. I don't think you're crazy. There is so much working against you in society, conditioning you to believe that. There is so much out there giving credit to your dreams. It's like, I think of like the advertisements in society and programs and TV shows and judgy mother-in-laws or whoever. I think of them as like putting coins in the slot of that program. Like you have this game running in your brain that says, if I take an hour to myself, I'm a bad mom. And someone just comes by and some ad that makes you feel less than just puts a coin in that game. Like, yep, I give credit to that game. And you are just like this warrior being like, I need an hour. I need to take a freaking shower. Like the first thing is to just start to neutralize those fears and give credit to yourself. Like, I believe you when you say this is hard. And even a layer deeper than that is I would start to look at those fears in the face and really, really transmute them. And when I say transmute them, I mean like be brave enough to take an action in the direction of your fear. Like do it scared. That's what people mean when they say do it scared. Like I remember getting a massage once. Oof, my son was like a month old and I had the worst back pain. I remember just like sitting up crying because my back pain from pregnancy and from breastfeeding and from, I wasn't used to holding something like all day, like holding a little baby all day. I just wasn't used to that. And I actively went into the face of the mom guilt and I went and got a massage. And I remember the whole massage feeling like, I think I was like 30 minutes in and I was like, all this mind chatter of like, you're wasting this money. This is just like a waste of money. And and think about the tip on top of that and the gas you drove to get here, just like nonstop. And I realized like, I am not enjoying this massage. This is painful. My body is cramped up. I'm not enjoying this because of all of this anger and this resentment that I'm holding on to. I was angry about my mother-in-law for something she said 4 months ago, like all these things. And I just said, for the next half hour or whatever, just be a villain and let yourself have this massage. Just be the bad guy for half an hour. And then you can come home and it'll be fine. But the fact of the matter is like, I did ask a friend, can you just watch my son for an hour? And he slept the whole time. And having that experience, I think really, really gave a piece into my brain that said, it's going to be okay. Like, nobody died. I got a massage for an hour and nobody died. Like, because it's so easy to listen to me and say, yeah, I could never do that. Or what I really mean is like listening to this in theory is not really going to move as much as you moving matter does. Like you moving your body and going and getting like that release of a massage. And it does not have to be a massage. Often days, like even me just driving in the car, because I have to be very, very intentional about the way that I'm spending money these days, because I can remember being in this position and listening to other podcasts and thinking like, wow, there's a huge financial barrier here. Like I am not in a position where I can just like hire a sitter for the week and go somewhere like tropical. I'm not in that position of my life. So I need to be very, very, I need to romanticize those little car rides. I need to romanticize that massage. I need to romanticize that Starbucks trip. I need to be very active. And in doing so, it feels like it's like a point to me. Like I earned 1 point for going to Starbucks and getting what I wanted, or driving in the car and listening to my music. It's little things like if my baby falls asleep in the car, changing the music from like Miss Rachel or whatever he likes to what I like, it just feels like a point. It's like, oh, that feels good. Like I am taking this time and intentionally reclaiming. And I also want my son to live in my world. Like I want him to be a person. I want him to learn from me. I don't want to be constantly scrambling in survival mode, trying to give him whatever it is that he wants, being a helicopter parent, waiting for him to give me cues to live, waiting for him to give me permission to live. I did feel that way a little bit when he was a newborn. Like, okay, now he's asleep. Now I have permission to live. Now I can be who I want to be now that he's asleep. And I noticed some resentment starting to bubble up. And now that he's a toddler and he sometimes will skip a nap, sometimes he'll want to be on mom all day. And I can't. I have a life too. I am a person too. And I would say at the end of the day, it's facing those fears and taking that step and letting yourself be a villain. And I say be a villain because it means like, okay, so if your stories are telling you that you're like the worst human in the world, you're the worst mom in the world because you did this for half an hour, 2 days, 3 days a week, like your baby's fine, they're safe. Like then be a bad guy and then go back and be a good guy again. Like I just think adding a layer of comedy and humor and just like lightheartedness just like lets me run that old program in the background while I'm physically doing what my higher self knows to do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Because it's like, oh, well, lean in. Okay, so if the fears are really an issue, okay, well, let's lean into them even further. And that I love your tip of like adding in some comedy and just being like, okay, well, let's just test the waters and be what society says I shouldn't be, even for it's like 30 minutes a day, whatever it is, and then reassess and maybe do some journaling and be like, okay, well, how did this feel? What did the other party think, aka the children, right? And it's so, I love your suggestion of like seeking to reclaim it throughout the day. What does it look like? Even if it's 30 minutes. I love, 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 love those examples. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thinking back to when my kids were little and under the age of 5, I'm like, oh, and even like, honestly, I mean, this feminine energy work, at least for me, actually, I felt like pulled the wool over my eyes to the point where I could actually live because it forced me to get back in touch with my body. And so only then did I actually really, truly start living. And so, for example, like my son went to a sleepover last night and I was like, oh, this is kind of weird because only one kid is gone. But I was like, him and my youngest fight like crazy. And so I'm like, I capitalized on that. So I was like, you know what? I am so freaking excited that there's going to be no fighting for the next like less than 24 hours because he's like not in the house. So, but I just would have been like, oh, okay. I wouldn't have seen it as like, what am I going to be grateful for? Right. I just would have been like, oh, what's next? What can I do in this time frame or like whatever. And so I think that that's an amazing tip. And while you were conversing about, your son being a person outside of you and you being a person outside of your son made me think of, I was talking to someone the other day and they were telling me about their children and their children are all grown, like well over 20s, 30s. And they were saying how one of their kids, took a break from schooling and she was so like, I could tell she was frustrated. And she was just like, it was almost like she was exasperated because her kid decided to take a break. And I was like, but why are you so worried? Like, it's her life, you know? Like, she can do whatever she wants. And if she's burnt out from the intense amount of schooling that she's been doing for the last, like, 6 years, then, I mean, doesn't she deserve a break? Like, it doesn't, like, even if she decides not to do anything with it, that doesn't mean she's a failure. But I didn't say this to this person because I was like, you know, it wasn't my place. But I was just thinking of how intensely she felt because of something her daughter wasn't doing. And I'm like, that's kind of sad to me that it's like, where, and I mean, it's not where, because we all know it's been around for eons, like this identity of like, oh, well, you know, you have to do in order to be.
Yeah.
And I really feel like that is so interwebbed in this like identity of being a mom. If you don't do, and if you don't go and bend over backwards and literally service your children to running them to all the games, running them to who knows, helping them fill out college applications and like even paying for their college. And if you don't literally give yourself entirely to your children, then you won't be someone.
Yeah. That sounds like, yeah, no, go ahead.
It's so wrong.
Yeah. It's like, I think that's where what's played out in that is like intense dance moms. And I was a dance kid. And my parents did not engage in the dance parent culture, but I knew other people who did. Like dance moms are so like, my identity is riding on this. You better do well. You better perform well. You better get accepted to the best ballet programs, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very grateful that my parents didn't fall into that program because I think that I was their 6th child. So I think by the time it was my turn, they were a little tired. So I'm sure that they also felt with a lot of guilt as well, but they had a lot going on. And so I'm grateful that wasn't shared with me. That program was not shared with me. I had a friend growing up whose mom was very, very picky and choosy about what she could wear, what clothing she could wear and what kind of makeup she could wear. And it kind of clicked for me later on that like her daughter's representation of herself what lands on her. And so that's why she cared so much. It took me so long to understand, like, why do you care what color clothes she wears or what have you? And so I decided, like, I'm just going to live and be myself and practice making space for my son to show me who he is. Because I can't assume that I'm going to be so much better than everyone else, but practice making that space and becoming curious about who he is and letting him show me who he wants to be and offering guidance and knowing that I can't do it by myself is a lifelong journey that I'm entirely committed to, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And it's just it's so interesting because I mean, like, when I think about my kids and, you know, so many conversations that my husband and I have had of like, okay, well, what if, you know, the random occasion we do, which we don't even entertain those conversations very often. I mean, I'm over here like trying to convince my kid like not to go to college because I'm like, oh, look at how many opportunities there are, you know, like you could do something XYZ on the side. But I'm also like, you do you know what I mean? I'm like, I don't want you to conform to societal pressure because you absolutely, you know, if you want to be a doctor, go for it. You know, I'm not going to stop you. But I'm also just like, make sure you see everything. But I'm like, you do you. And when I think of, you know, because my husband and I have talked about like, well, what if they do something that maybe doesn't align with like our beliefs or whatever? I'm going to be like, you know, like I'm actively trying to practice that now. So then I'm not like, you did what now? Like with our life. And you know what I mean? Like, like with the claws, like digging into my kid and enforcing my beliefs on them because it's like, okay, well, let's see all the perspectives, right? Like what's the reasoning behind it? Maybe I just need to understand. And even then it's like, well, this is your life. I'm not like judge, jury over here. Like that's not my role. And I don't think that is supposed to be our roles as parents, especially as they grow up and grow older. So I think it's really important that, you know, especially for moms who are listening to this podcast, that it's like, you're not going to become an evil person if you separate your identity from your children. And I think I want to go into that even further because I think what society has led women to think is that, because we hear and we see like what the show TLC, I feel like is like the greatest example of like what happens if you become a selfish mom. Oh, you might fall into bad habits or like, I don't know, then your kids end up like, I don't know, driving ATVs across the yard and running over somebody else or something. I don't know. Some like really crazy, you know what I mean? It's like such an extreme version of like, oh, if you choose yourself, therefore you don't care. But it's like, do you actually believe that you would be that kind of person? You know?
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good point. I think you bring up the example of the TV show. It's like the TV shows, the programming, the advertisements, like the things, those are like our examples of society. Like it's just so interesting that when you think about the worst thing that could possibly happen, most of the time people bring up something that happened in a movie or a TV show because they're such powerful programmers. That was a huge thing for me, was if I do this, then I'm going to end up like that guy on that TV show or that mom on that TV show, or I'm going to be publicly shamed like in that TV show I saw, which is so fascinating to me to think about. Like Hollywood is like our muse for like what's going to happen to us in real life when it is just like ultimately a good story. It could be as simple as like, I have to keep all the lights on in my house because there's a monster under my bed. It's so powerful to realize that, which is why like the best medicine is to take action towards the direction of the parent that you want to be, and have all these tools. Movement and hypnosis are obviously my favorite, to calm your nervous system in the process, because otherwise like these unconscious beliefs are just going to rule you. And they have something to do with hypnosis that's called subconscious pipelining, which we've already touched on, is your children will inherit your subconscious beliefs. Even if you try your best, like I know my parents, I believe they tried their best to give us a better life than they had. I think they did a great job, but there's a lot of like unconscious beliefs that were not touched or dealt with or looked at that I believe that I inherited. And so you have to like actively go in there. And I believe that everybody who's listening to this podcast right now has taken the first step. Like you could be doing literally anything else, but instead you're getting curious about yourself as a parent, yourself as a mother, your feminine energy. And the beautiful thing about feminine energy is that it's like desire. You have a desire. If you're leading with your feminine desire, if you're in your feminine energy, you have a desire. And all the tangible things that come in to support you, like the time, the money, the opportunity, like the things that are 3D reality, will support you. They'll come in. You just have to lead with a desire. And the desire is that you want to be a better parent. You want to have, or why do you want to be a better parent? Why, what purpose do you want? What activities do you want to enjoy? Like what is in your castle? And you don't have to know right now, but having the desire to know that, to be curious about yourself, instead of telling the story of like, I never had the time to explore myself. I never had the money to explore myself. Becoming curious on who that person is. I think that one thing I'm proud of myself is like going through this journey, no matter what my budget was, no matter what my time was, no matter what my schedule was. I have always been committed to this journey. And that's something that I can say on my gravestone that I did, no matter whether I had the free time or the kids, the baby, the dogs, the like whatever it was, like that commitment will show you so much about yourself and will be an example to your children. It's about you doing and living is what's going to break the generational chain.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that so much. And I mean, it really has a domino effect. I mean, like it really is real. Real quick, I want to talk about what it is like for women, and you and I can both list our examples here, but I really want you to demonstrate to women what it is like to not experience the guilt of choosing you. And, what is the other side like? Let's go into that in detail, because it's like, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the benefits, but I really want you to go ham on like literally all the amazingness of what it's like to not experience that guilt when you do have time to yourself, and when you are choosing to work on your business, or you do choose to go out on a date night and you're like, yes, like, of course I deserve this,
So what does it feel like to not have that guilt?
Yeah.
It feels like having a new best friend, and that new best friend is you. Like it really does feel like my own time is so, I love being alone so much that in a way that I enjoy it more. It makes me think of how one of the biggest benefits is that I don't need to do as much to get. The analogy I want to have here is like, when you eat really, really rich chocolate or a really, really rich dessert or a high quality drink or food or whatever it is that you want, you don't feel like you need as much of it in order to get the same result as like a lot of less high quality chocolate. Like I could definitely finish an entire bag of chips, whereas like, the portion size of a highly quality meal is smaller. To me, now that my alone time is less. And I just find that I value it so much more. And not in that cheesy kind of like, you have to be grateful for the 3 seconds that you had walking around your car after closing, that you're like buckling your kid in the car seat and then you're walking around. That's only 3 seconds and you have to be grateful for it. I think doing this work has allowed me to feel like I've inherited a whole new best friend, a whole new person that I can bounce ideas off of, a whole new person whose ideas I trust. Like just now, actually, as you were speaking, I looked out the window and I saw my husband taking my son across the street to go to probably to the park that's down there. And just seeing that and like the capacity to just let that be and not worry about it and trust, and hearing my own inner voice say like, they're going to be fine, and trusting that's what it feels like, having a friend that says, if you had a friend tell you it's going to be okay, you trust them. Do you trust yourself when you say that? That's to me the biggest feeling. It's someone who I can mastermind with, brainstorm with, like have fun with, trust, be on the same page with, relax. Like when you were saying, how does it feel to live guilt-free? I thought of just like a picture of me sitting on the beach and eating a nutrient-dense meal and just like relaxing. And that is how I feel in moments like right now. And I don't actually need to go to the beach, get on the airplane, get my passport renewed and do that to feel that way. And that to me is priceless, because how much money have I spent before these skills trying to chase that high, trying to feel cool, trying to go to the coolest beaches. Like, I think also the gift of not always trying to feel cool is what's been given to me, because I'm like, wow, I can just sit here and look out my window and feel massive gratitude and feel like things are supported and I'm taken care of and I love myself and I love my company. That to me is the biggest benefit, is like being able to feel great emotional depth with so much less than I used to. And not in this like, I don't mean you need to have more with less. I mean, you get to have more with less, because I feel like I know a lot of women are told like, are given less and being told to be grateful for it. And that's not what that is. That is like a beautiful side effect of doing this work, is like, you just find that you need less and you get to have more.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So that leads into what I was going to say in terms of like, you know, I think my biggest concern about doing this work and like, you know, like choosing myself and daring to have time and peace, I was like, well, you know, the obvious mathematical answer is like, well, I'm just not going to be there as much for my kids. But ironically, what has happened is I'm actually doing more with my kids. And I'm not saying like, because even when I think about it, it's like, yeah, I love to read, like, but I also can do that in the same room as my children. And I still get like my peace and contentment while my kids are there. Like, you know, I'm not ignoring them. Like, we'll come over and my daughter, you know, will want to show me what she's drawing and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Like, that's great. And I'm not reading all the time. But like, when I'm done reading and I'm refreshed, I'm like, who wants to go get ice cream? Who wants, let's get, guys, I'm going to go in the pool. And the kids, as soon as they know I'm going to the pool, they're like, we're going in the pool. Like, they like stop everything that they're doing. And or I'm like, oh, let's go for a walk. Do you guys want to go for a bike ride? Like, because I'm replenishing my own energy, I'm able to give it that much more. Like, I swear, literally, I mean, I can count on my hands how many little times that I did that with my children prior to doing this feminine energy and like somatic work, where I was like way more in touch with my body and my identity. Like, I hardly ever, like, I was like, don't even want to hang out with you guys. I'm with you like all the time. I literally don't want to hang out with you. Or if we did do something, I felt so much guilt while I was spending time with them, because I was like, I'm supposed to be happy, air quotes, you know, but I really don't feel happy right now because I'm just so freaking tired. I like need a vacation, you know? And so it's like, but now carving out that time for me has allowed them a better experience of mom, because mom's like, ooh, let's just, you know, I check in with myself and I'm like, ooh, would be fun, you know, whether it's like playing Mario Kart or whatever, you know, but like, let's go play some basketball. Like, let's go do some things that I know my kids really want to do, because I can hold space for it, because I've been holding space for myself. So it's like you magnify. So if you're scared of what it's like to have an identity, just think that like I mean, we've all heard this, like if mom's happy, everyone else is happy. Like literally, it's like when you can develop a sense of self without guilt, that gets magnified by like everyone else that's around you. So like, and even if your kids are out of the home and you're like living your best life, your kids be like, dang, I want to hang out with her. Like I just saw a TikTok last night where these two like high school kids were taking videos of their parents and they were like dancing off to like a dance party, or the kid came down with a stereo and the parents were like jiving off to it like in the living room, and they were like, this is why we're like never gonna leave we're never gonna move out of the house, because our parents are just so cool and they like do fun stuff with us. And I'm like, I sent it to my husband. I was like, that's gonna be us in like 10 years. And he was like, yeah, totally. Like, just because, you know, you're able to enjoy what you enjoy, and the kids are going to be like, ooh, we want to have some of that. And then it's like they become magnetized to you, and then you don't have this guilt of like, oh, well, I'm not spending time with my children, because you're doing things that you love, and other people around you are just going to be like, ooh, I want a piece of that. You know what I mean? Like, let's hang out, let's spend time together. And it's not this like, oh, I have to deal with the guilt of the fact that I haven't spent enough time together. So therefore now it's Saturday. So now we need to go and do something together as a family. But I actually really don't want to do it. I just want to stay home.
That's like an obligation. That's such an icky feeling. Yeah.
It's such an icky feeling. And I feel like it's something, I mean, I don't know a mom that doesn't, you know, because it's like, and honestly, a lot of moms build their entire lives off of just obligation. And then they, you know, 20 years later are like, oh, either listening to this podcast and being like, oh, what is it like to not have an obligation? What is it like to just have free time, period, and not do anything, to not feel obligated to do anything? I'm going to pause real quick because there was something, I'm going to put a marker because there was something else I thought of. And now I'm like, shoot, what the heck was it? But I was like, it was something that you said. Now I got to remember.
I thought of a story about my mom. I don't know if I can just like go, I don't know. If it helps, if I just like,
yes.
Go. Okay. Go. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because my mom currently, I feel, built her identity on like obligation. And she has admitted that. And now she's currently kind of in her selfish era, which is very beautiful because all our children have moved out of the house. And she is calling me all the time with these breakthroughs. Like she's on this hike in the woods in Canada where she has always wanted to be. And she's there now finally. And she's calling me and she's saying these breakthroughs of like, I just realized that me doing what I want to do is making my life so much more interesting and dynamic, because if I didn't selfishly volunteer at the food kitchen, which is such a fascinating usage of the word selfish, volunteering at the food kitchen, and if I didn't go and like tutor these immigrants in English, I would not have been able to open up all these doors for more conversation. It's just unraveling in front of her how much more rich her life is for everyone, that she is being more selfish. And one thing that she keeps saying is like, what if I had had more time to do this? What if I had like just been more brave and just tried this earlier? And I think about that a lot. It's like really a source of, it's really a conversation about bravery to do this earlier. It's to do something different and to go against your programming. And I think about my mom just calling me with all these breakthroughs over and over and over again.
That's amazing.
Really, really humbles me and makes me realize like the bigger picture here. And it makes me, it definitely relinquishes any doubt that I have, and seeing the effect that this has on other people. You mentioned something about reading in front of your children. One thing that I am currently working with is when I'm in a lot of, let's say, mom resentment. I'm in the state of like, I'm playing with my son and I'm resenting how much time he wants to spend with me, or how much he still wants to nurse, or how much he just wants to be all over me. I will be on my phone while being with him as a kind of like frustrated way of trying to reclaim my time. And I have noticed that when I'm on my phone, he notices, and he gets even more panicked and more, he cries more when I'm on my phone. And so one thing that I'm currently doing is making sure that I schedule time to work and be more efficient on what I'm doing on my phone, so that I have that time that when I'm with him and I start to feel bored or resentful, I remind myself like, I will have time to play on my phone later. I will have time. Like I do have my scheduled silly time later, or my work time. Like I'm making sure that I have that. And if I don't have that, then that's a conversation with my partner. That's a conversation with my household. That's a conversation with my budget. Can I afford to have somebody watch him for a day? Can I give him to my mother-in-law? Because I really don't want him to have this ingrained memory of me being on my phone annoyed at him. Because this is the first generation of children who will have had smartphones in their life the entire time. So I'm definitely trying to be more conscious about that. That's a constant mental conversation for sure.
Oh, totally. And I mean it, I feel like, to clarify, especially for the people that are listening, when we say be selfish, it's not like, oh, I'm just going to go clubbing every single day this week, just because that's what I want. Like, that's not really the context we're talking about. It's like selfishness in relation to what your soul is craving and like what your identity is craving in terms of like what it wants, like, because your identity wants to come out and exist. Your higher self wants to come out because your insides are like, okay, we know that there's a way out of this, which is obviously why you're listening to this podcast. So I think I remember what I was going to say earlier was, overall in this context of being able to do less while being a mom with a lot of obligations, and even if you have one or multiple children, it's like the demand increases the more children you have, and that can be overwhelming. But it's like, if you are choosing to do a trade with a friend or drop your kids off at a play group, or I don't know, like bribe your neighbor with something, to like watch your kids or whatever, it's not the guilt that you're trying to work through or avoid is directly connected. And this is where, hearing you talk made me come to this realization, is that it is directly connected to either your avoidance or your fear of a sense of self. Ultimately, I feel like that's overall what this whole conversation circles back to, is that doing less is going to be triggering because you're afraid of having you. Doing less and having more, or just doing less, period, without guilt, stems from a fear of having you, right?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that's just kind of summarizing like what we've talked about, which is really insane.
Which it makes me curious again, like what we were talking about earlier. If that makes you feel uncomfortable, is developing the sense of self, it's, do you value yourself? Do you trust? Do you believe that you will do good things with more time, more energy, more creativity? Like, are you afraid of yourself? Is a fascinating conversation. And I believe that like that is my purpose, and my deepest belief is like, the more you, the better. The more, especially like when as I've been talking and thinking about the listeners of your podcast, like if you're listening to this podcast, I fundamentally believe the more you, the better. Like,
totally agree.
It's so easy to think about, like, if with this free time, I'm going to be a bad mom because I'm going to go clubbing every day. I don't think that about the listeners of this podcast. Like,
right.
It is easy to think that of yourself. But I just think so highly of people who do this type of work. So I'm not worried. I'm not worried about that if that makes you, dear listener, feel any better.
Well, and that is a whole other conversation. Like, are we subconsciously judging other moms who, or are we experiencing jealousy of other moms? Like, I have, I feel like I've gotten passive comments all the time. Oh, well, like, your husband stays at home and looks after the kids. And I'm like, okay, but also I literally, like, I'm the one who made that happen. But like, I did choose that, but I also had a lot of work that I had to go through. And it also wasn't easy for him because he's like, are you going to be okay? Because like the role is going to fall on you. And I was like, it'll be fine. And at the time I was in way more of my masculine energy. And I was like, oh, we'll just work more, which in hindsight was not the answer. But it's fine because it's like, yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work, but I also wouldn't have had it any other way.
I love that. You said that you made that happen, like you pouring into you and your identity and your purpose, and like you being visible made that happen. I love that.
And I was like, I'm not, it just, my body was like, I just cannot be doing kid drop-offs twice a day. I just cannot handle that anymore. And so my husband, literally, I mean, we have been talking about it for like a year already. And I was like, I think it's time for you to like take that over. But it also meant, okay, what am I going to do to substitute, of course, like the additional income and like all that stuff. So, when women say like passive comments to me, I was like, okay, but it also wasn't like a walk in the park. But I feel like even if I had come at that from a feminine energy perspective and was like, oh, I'm just going to trust, it would have actually been way easier for me. Because then I would have inherently trusted that more money would have just come in and I didn't actually have to do more. And I think that that's what a lot of women get scared of, in addition to the sense of identity, is like, oh, all the what ifs, all the failures that potentially happen if they decide to just not go and hustle their way through relaxation, and the prime example of what you talked about in your massage is such a great, I mean, like, this is exactly what it means to not really live, because your brain is on a whole other planet running through like your 30,000 to-do tasks that you have to do, and you're not actually relaxing. And it's like you just negated that whole experience because you paid money for it. Now you're out of money, and then you're also out of relaxation because you couldn't actually be in the moment, right?
Yeah.
So like, you can't. And I feel like there are tons of women who are out there actively doing those things and still feeling like they have no time to themselves. And this is exactly why. Because time to yourself and peace and joy and contentment, just what you experienced when you were watching your husband and your son go across the street, it's like that comes from being able to sit with yourself.
Yeah.
And be like, what is it like to just feel peace and feel joy and feel contentment? And that has to come from a connection of self and a connection of body. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. It's like if I didn't actively look out the window and actively change my thought from like guilt to peace, like what am I doing this for? Like what am I in this life for? Like what am I a person for? Instead of this, like, I mean, this, like instead of working so that then I can feel peace and contentment, it's like that the micro decisions is something that I've been thinking about. It's like, what are the micro decisions every day, the little tiny opportunities that are constantly in your face, showing up for you all the time, getting you to look at, as opposed to like, what is this, when am I going to get hit with a big broad stroke of luck? No, it's how can I make these micro decisions to develop my sense of self? It really is the tiny stuff that adds up.
100%. And I feel like there's a lot of women who can attest who are like retired and they're like, I don't feel more relaxed now than I did. Like maybe I have more time, but it's like, I don't even know, like they don't know how to relax still. And it's almost like the retirement forces them into it. And it's like, well, you could have been experiencing this well before retirement. It's just that, a situation prompted you to move into how can I? Because otherwise you're just like, just like you were saying, like you have to choose it. Like you have to be willing to experience peace and joy and happiness throughout the day. And I think so many people are like, oh, well, it's just easier for me to suffer because suffering is relatable, to be quite frank.
Well, I know. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know. Yeah.
It's like, suffering is so much easier than I'm going to choose happiness.
There's something so fascinating to be said about like, I started to grapple with this a lot when I became a mom, was this feeling of like the martyrdom. Like I can be unhappy, other people can. So like I'm going to forego what I want because I believe in my capacity to be unhappy more than other people's capacity to be unhappy. Like if the baby's unhappy, baby cries. If I'm unhappy, I can just shove it down. And how that perpetuates into your life of like this belief of I am meant to be a martyr and I am better at being unhappy than the people around me are.
That is such a twisted stuff, man. Oh my gosh.
It really does come up later because I have been guilty of this myself as well, because there are situations in life, like when you're on an airplane and the toddler behind you is kicking your seat, maybe you are better at putting on your headphones and tuning out than you are than the toddler is at regulating themselves to not kick your seat. That's true. However, as a lifestyle, like having that as a lifestyle, it does that fester, like that resentment that festers does come back. And it's going to come back on the people that you don't want it to come back on, the people that you love, your children, your family, your partner, your potential new business opportunities, potential new friends. It does come back. And it's not the way. Take it from me. It's not the way.
Well, and I think it really comes down to like wanting to feel like you're doing something for the better good of everyone, when in actuality, it's totally not. It's not bettering the good of everyone. It's literally making it more miserable for everyone, because if you're over here silently suffering and trying to like hold it in, everyone else can be like, are you okay? You're going to be like, no, it's fine. But then you can't actually be present because you're dealing with this inner demon, right? So it's like, it really does have an effect on everyone. And like you said, or it's going to come up later and haunt you and everyone else, because it's like, oh, what were the repercussions of that? Because there are 100% repercussions for being like, yeah, I can suffer more or better than other people.
I'm better at suffering.
I'm better. Yeah. Wow. What a strange. I mean, when you actually say it out loud, which I've experienced that subconsciously. And so being able to say that out loud sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, to think that I actually solely believed that, mind, body, and soul, for like a good portion of like 25 years of my life is really twisted. And it's so damaging.
Yeah, I think whenever I catch myself thinking that way, I think back on, this is a whole other conversation, but I think back on my experience with childbirth. And I think that was my martyrdom. I hunkered down. I did what I had to do. I pushed the baby out. That's it. We don't have to do that every day. We don't have to suffer so someone else can have life every day, every moment, every second. And I do think that the significance, the physical, physiological, like in your body significance of having a baby and then being celebrated constantly for some of the greatest pain and trauma that a lot of us have ever been through, no matter how your baby came into this world, that being rewarded in such a weird way, I believe programs us to think that martyrdom means approval. Because think about how intense it is to go through the worst pain in the world that you cannot even describe sometimes leads to trauma, fear, and then being told over and over again, like, congratulations, your baby's amazing. All that matters is that you had a healthy baby, over and over and over again. That's a deep program.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. You did a great job. Like, I love that. Your baby's here. And you don't have to relive that experience in every micro decision of the day. I understand how that can be significant for sure. But it does not have to continue. It's something that I think about a lot, and that I have worked with in hypnosis with clients before as well. And one of the reasons why I incorporate movement into my services as well is because it's one thing to consciously be like, oh yeah, I should be such a martyr. Mm-hmm. But does your body believe that? Does your subconscious mind believe that?
Also, I mean, and the subconscious mind and the body are so linked together. It's like, if you're listening to this podcast and you feel like, you've been trying to make headway, for the last like 10, 15 years, and you're not making the headway that you want, probably because your body's not involved in the process. And I mean, for the listeners, I had a somatic therapist on my podcast a few episodes ago with Amy Nicholson. And it was like, gosh, I've started looking into getting certified myself because I'm like, holy dudes, like, it's just so, like, it is beyond mind-boggling that so many people still don't know about the power of healing through your body, because it literally is truly, absolutely astonishing. Okay, well, this has been amazing. So how should people connect with you? Give us your socials, all the good stuff, because I love when you show up on social media. I'm like, hell yeah. Like, I literally, like, yeah. I'm always like, Katie's such an inspiration. Literally for real. So
yeah. How can people work with me? Yeah. So I actually just started building this membership called Microdose Your Muse. And it's meant to be an everyday little, like, there's going to be little tiny movement videos in there, little tiny short hypnoses, digestible voice notes, digestible thoughts that are meant to be people who are wanting more, but they're not ready to invest in other services, which is private movement classes. They're very intuitive based off of what somebody tells me, or custom hypnoses is also something that I do. So those are like the two big ways that people work with me, is private movement classes, as well as we work on like releasing trauma and creating a new identity for yourself through movement. It's not just about like crying and hugging ourselves, which there's a lot of that, but it's also like creating flow with the universe, creating flow and strength within yourself. Like, let's say you've always wanted to be a Pilates girly, but the thought of like being a Pilates girly was way too intimidating to you. How can we rewrite that story in your body? That's what I do in my private movement classes. Custom hypnoses is the same thing. Like, how can we invoke a very compelling image that your subconscious mind can get on board with? And how can I paint a picture for you that gives you your brain a direction to go in? Like, for example, if the Castle of Mirrors image was very, very compelling to you and you want to implant your own story into that, I would make a custom hypnosis for you, record it. You would listen to that every day for 90 days. Your life will change. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. But I'm currently working on something like easier for people to work with me, and it's a membership. It's a Patreon membership called Microdose Your Muse. I'm really excited about that because it just feels like I could get this out to more people without needing to go through if they're not able to invest in me. But I still do believe in those two big movement and hypnosis modalities. Like, that is enormous for sure.
I love it. Okay, so give us the info. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah. Okay. So TikTok is a big one. Love me a TikTok. TikTok is called Funky Aphrodite. And then I have a new Instagram that's katie.aka.funkyAphrodite. And the same thing as on Threads. And I have an email list where I've my little freebie is 111 hypnotic affirmations that are designed to go into your subconscious mind by the way that they are worded. And that's my little freebie. If you want to get on my email list, that's my little gift to you. That's me.
Cool. Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that this was really eye-opening for the women that are listening. And I appreciate you. You're amazing.
Thank you, Miriam. I had so much fun.
Awesome.